Welcome to our sharing on St. John's Gospel. We are continuing to discuss the controversy in John chapter 7. And in John chapter 7 and 8, we are right into the very heart of the confrontation between Jesus and the leadership of Israel. So I want to begin in verse 14, where I left off the last day. When the festival was half over, Jesus went to the temple and began to teach. The Jewish leaders were astonished, and they said, "How did he learn to read? He has not been taught." So this is where I left off the last day. I want to give you Jesus' response to this. Now, they have insulted Jesus, absolutely, which I have told you before, but that's not what we want to look at now. We want to look at what Jesus actually said to them. So I will first of all read his response. Jesus said, "My teaching is not from myself. It comes from the one who sent me. And if anyone is prepared to do his will," now notice in the above realm, the issue is doing God's will and loving God and loving your neighbor. So if anyone is prepared to do his will, he would know whether my teaching was from God or not, or whether my teaching was my own. When a man's doctrine is his own, he's hoping to get honor for himself. But when he is working for the honor of the one who sent him, he is sincere. And he's by no means an impostor. Did not Moses give you the law? Yet not one of you keeps the law. Okay. For Jesus to say that to the leadership on their home ground in the temple, in front of all the pilgrims coming from far and near, this is a public declaration like it could only be done in an era where there was no phones and no internet and all the means of communication that we have. This is as public as it can get. Jesus is absolutely declaring who he is and that they are failed leaders. In the controversy that's going to continue, not only here in chapter 7, but in chapter 8, there is a front stage and a back stage. You have what's going on with Jesus and the people in the front. And in the backstage, you have the leaders plotting for his death. And they're going to do as much as they can to try and pull him down. So your judgment as to what's going on depends on whether you are front stage or you are backstage. And then just to complicate it a little bit more, your judgment is also dependent on whether you are at the level of below or the level of above. It's absolutely amazing. John has these wonderful dimensions to his text. Of course, the problem with the leadership is that Jesus has not studied in their rabbinical schools. I gave you that before. And therefore, they have not given him the knowledge that he has. They do not know where he got the knowledge he has, and that's why they insult him. You find that when you go back to the synoptic gospels, the people were always amazed at Jesus' teaching. Here's just one example. Mark 1:22. The people were amazed at his teaching because he taught them as one who had authority in himself. He didn't teach like the scribes. So this is actually terribly important. To teach like a scribe meant that you were going to quote all the famous rabbis and let people know just how much you have studied the scrolls and all the rest of it. But you were simply giving back what other people had given to you. What Jesus was giving to them, they knew came from his innermost being. And they also knew instinctively that it was the truth. And this is a real problem for the Jewish leaders, and they don't want to accept it. So Jesus says, "My teaching has not come from myself." In other words, I didn't make this up. This is truth as it really is. This is me revealing what God the Father wants you to have. And so if they're saying you have not studied under the famous Hillel or Shammai or Gamaliel, then Jesus is saying, but I was in the bosom of the Father for all eternity. I've had the greatest teacher that can be in heaven or on earth. I have been taught by God. Now, any of the saints and mystics who have had very deep experiences of God will tell you that they learned more in an hour in God's presence than you would learn in years of a university. And the knowledge is infused into you. So Jesus is telling them, yes, I've been to school eternally. Yes, I've had the greatest teacher that there possibly could be, but because you do not accept that I have been there, John has told us that back in chapter 1, verse 18, that Jesus leaned on the heart of the Father for all eternity, and that Jesus is the one sent by the Father. In other words, if you go to a university, it isn't just that you are going to learn. You are going to take this learning to others. You are going to become a teacher yourself. You're going to pass this on to others. So Jesus is saying, I was in the Father's school for all eternity, and he sent me to teach you. And then he said that anyone who's prepared to do God's will would actually be able to recognize that teaching. That is true. The church has always acknowledged that in the heart of the laity in the church, there is the sensus fidelium, that we know when we're being taught the truth, and we recognize the truth as well. And we recognize falsehood. And we give exactly the same response to falsehood as the people in Jerusalem did to the men who were teaching them wrongly. We pay no attention to it. We just don't listen to it. And so Jesus says that if someone produces a doctrine or a religion of his own, he's looking for some kind of benefit. What benefit is Jesus looking for? Nothing. Nothing at all. He's giving everything. He's given everything he is and everything he has to us. By the time Jesus died on the cross, he had given us his own Father to be our Father. And in his dying, he gave us his own mother to be our mother. He gave us his own word to feed us. He gave us his own flesh and blood to be our food and drink. He gave us his whole realm of above to be our area where we could live. He gave us his own life. He gave us everything he had. And by the time he actually drew his final breath on the cross, there was nothing left but the skin on his bones. Not even a drop of blood left. He had given absolutely everything. He's not the one who's playing the hypocrite. It's them, because he's already shown them, and we're going to see it again in chapter 8, that while they proclaim the law, they don't actually keep it. They break the law quite a lot, but they punish the laity for breaking the law. So one of the duties of the leaders of any church indeed, as well as the leaders of Israel, was to discern a true prophet from a false prophet. And this particular part of the controversy is dealt with in the synoptics more than in John, that they should have discerned that John the Baptist was a true prophet. And if they did, they would have accepted Jesus. And because they didn't discern John, they have no ability to discern Jesus at all. And then Jesus challenges them. He says to them, why do you want to kill me? Now what he's doing is he's bringing their secret plotting out into the public eye. And the crowds that are present in the temple are completely shocked. You're crazy, they said. Nobody wants to kill you. Oh, but they do. And what Jesus has done is he's brought it out into the light so that it can be dealt with. And then he says to the leadership in front of everybody, because the whole controversy is in front of everybody, the reason why you want to kill me is because I cured that man that was 38 years sick. Let me read this for you. Why do you want to kill me? The crowd replied, you're mad. Who wants to kill you? Jesus said, there is one work that I have done, and you're all surprised at it, and that is he healed that man on the Sabbath day. Look, he said, Moses ordered you to practice circumcision. Not that it began with Moses. It goes back right to the patriarchs. And you circumcise people on the Sabbath. Now, if a man can be circumcised on the Sabbath so that the law of Moses is not broken, why are you angry with me for making a man whole on the Sabbath, making him complete? Don't judge by appearances. Stop judging by appearances. Now, he's going to say exactly the same thing in the next chapter. Stop judging by appearances. Let your judgment be according to what is right. Now, everybody in the audience would have understood the implication of what Jesus is saying about making a man whole on the Sabbath. And so we have a little bit of a reminder that when they circumcised a child in those days, they said that the child was being healed because he was being brought right into the covenant. And Jesus says, if that is how you understand circumcision, then you must understand that I have come to make everybody whole. I've come to make them complete. And of course, you would make them complete on the Sabbath. My Father goes on working, and so do I. Do you remember chapter 5, verse 17? And so Jesus continues giving life and making people whole on the Sabbath. And he deliberately challenged them on this because they were merely looking at external rules. They were not looking at what God was doing, not at all. So now we shift a little bit. Jesus has answered them on that. So they want to now turn it to who are you and where do you come from? Now he will answer them many times and they won't take any of his answers. And his extraordinary patience in dealing with them is fascinating to me. Meanwhile, some of the people of Jerusalem were saying, isn't this the man they want to kill? Oh. So the people who thought Jesus was crazy in saying that the leadership wanted to kill him were actually the pilgrims coming from all over the world, the known world, for this feast. But the ones who actually lived in Jerusalem and could hear the gossip that was going on around the city, they knew what was going on. And here he is, he's speaking freely, and they've nothing to say to him. But you see, they're plotting in the background, and in chapter 8, you'll see how they come out and they challenge him. But they give the people a chance to feel as if everything was normal when it is not actually normal. Can it be true that the authorities have made up their minds that this man really is the Christ? And yet we all know where he comes from, and when the Christ appears, nobody will know where he comes from. So this is the subject of the next part of the controversy. Where does this man come from? Now, the thing is, Israel was a small country. A small amount of investigation, they would have found out all the information. To me, it's completely impossible that the leadership in Jerusalem did not know that Jesus was born in Bethlehem. And they're going to make an insinuation to him in chapter 8 that they do know about his birth. So they're being very hypocritical and they're being very deceitful in their dealings with him. So everybody knew that the Messiah was to be born in Bethlehem because the prophet Micah said that very clearly. And thou, Bethlehem, in the land of Judah, out of you will come the one who is to shepherd my people Israel. So they knew that. They also knew that he had to be a Judean, but Jesus comes from Galilee. They knew that if he was truly the Messiah, he would have to be a descendant of King David. They also knew that Jesus' father, Joseph, was dead. So we're going to have wonderful toing and froing on these subjects as we go on. So, because they know him superficially, Jesus said, no, knowing somebody superficially is not knowing them. If I know your name and your address, that does not mean I know you personally. Only somebody who is in a close relationship with you begins to know you. And as people who are married will tell you, it can take a lifetime to truly know another person. And anybody who is in a prayer life will tell you it takes a whole lifetime to really get to know God. Okay. So Jesus answers the queries that they're actually making. And so he says, yes, you know me. That is, I am Yeshua, son of Joseph of Nazareth. You know that. You know where I come from. That means I come from Nazareth. But these are not the realities, the real realities. Yet I have not come from myself. No, there is one who sent me, and I come from him. Now, they can hear very clearly that Jesus is saying, I have not come from Joseph of Nazareth. Because he has said over and over, I come from my Father. I come from the heaven. I come from above. Okay. There is one who sent me, and I really come from him, and you do not know him. Now, back in chapter 5, Jesus told the woman of Samaria that they were worshipping a God they didn't really know. But now we're in the heart of Jerusalem. We're actually in the temple. We're actually in the presence of the leadership of Israel. And Jesus tells them, you don't know him either. I wonder, is there any difference 20 centuries later? I don't think so. I think the Lord is still with us. He's still unknown to us. How many people truly know God? How many people truly have a relationship with God? How many people know for certain that Jesus really is the Son of God? Oh yes, they have the doctrine answers. They have information in a book. But do they know it themselves? Do they know it in their hearts? And if everybody else denied it, do they know? I think one of the most wonderful answers I ever received was from a man who said to me, I know that I know that I know. And if they take me apart, he said, piece by piece, every part of me will declare the truth that Jesus is God. I said, yes, you know. Other people just simply have doctrine. They don't know. And so this was the position here, that people had lots of doctrine. They had loads of commentaries. They had lots of liturgy, but they didn't have this personal relationship that gave them personal knowledge of God. And that's what the Lord wants each one of us to have, that each one of us will walk with God and will know God personally. And so Jesus said, you don't know him, but I know him because he's been on the bosom of the Father for all eternity. Because I have come from him, and it was he who sent me. The leadership are so annoyed because they know exactly what he's claiming, that they wanted to arrest him, but John says the time hadn't come. The time hadn't come. And Jesus is going to tell his apostles in chapter 9, look, until my hour comes, I'm as safe as anything. As long as the light is there, so long as the day is there, there is no problem. So getting to know God personally is a very important issue. Let's look at the next section of this tussle between Jesus and the leadership. There were many people in the crowds who actually believed in him, however. They were saying, when the Christ comes, would he have more signs than this man? You see, this is the problem that we heard of even with Nicodemus back in chapter 3, that the Jewish people are interested in the signs. And Nicodemus said, we know you come from God because of the signs. And so here are the men present in the temple for this feast, and they are saying, this man has the signs. Hearing that rumors like this were going around about him, spreading among the people, the leadership sent the temple police to arrest Jesus. This is a wonderful moment, really wonderful moment. And the fact that they send the police to arrest Jesus, this is the first time they actually take action about it. And it's because no matter what they do, Jesus is giving more and more and more evidence as to who he is. And in spite of all the controversy, in spite of anything that the leadership are saying, more and more people are actually believing in Jesus. This provoked them to try and arrest him. And so Jesus' response to this was, I will remain with you only a short time now. He only has months to live. And then I will go back to the one who sent me. You will look for me, but you will not find me, because where I am, you cannot come. So Jesus warns the chosen people in the very center of their country, their city, and their temple, that the day of salvation for them is almost over. He has come for them. It was 3.5 years, or as the prophets have said previously, 3.5 years, 42 months, or 1260 days. It was a short period of time. It was the day of grace. It was when God would be with them personally. And it was the day of decision as well. They didn't realize they were in the valley of decision. And if he goes back to the Father and they still have not made a decision about him, then the day of salvation will be over and they will have missed it. There's no greater tragedy you could think of. God doesn't play games with us. God himself was present to them in the temple that day in the person of Jesus of Nazareth. They were the most privileged people on the planet. And yet they do not act like people who are privileged. The leaders completely misunderstand because their blindness is going deeper and deeper. And so they react on the level of below. And they said, "Where is he going that we can't be able to find him? Is he going abroad to the people who are dispersed among the Greeks? And will he teach the Greeks? What does he mean when he says, 'You will look for me and you will not find me, that where I am you cannot come'?" So you can see they have no idea what Jesus is actually saying. And yet they've stumbled on a truth unconsciously. Because when John wrote this text, the church had gone abroad. The whole of the kingdom of God had gone abroad. And they were teaching the Greeks. And they were teaching the Romans and everybody else that the church was going to go abroad after the resurrection. And it was going to be a great tragedy for them, because at that stage they would be facing the judgment of God. So sadly, the nation would have missed its opportunity. It's day of grace. It's Yom Yahweh, the day of the Lord. I think it's extremely sad. And so Jesus has one more great revelation to make to them in this context. And I just am fascinated with the fact that regardless of the opposition against him, he will persevere and persevere and persevere. And so you realize that he is not motivated by anything outside of himself. His motivation comes absolutely from within. So on the last and the greatest day of the festival, Jesus stood there and he cried out, "If any man is thirsty, let him come to me. Let the man come and drink if he believes in me. As scripture says, from his breast will flow fountains of living water." And John says he was speaking of the Spirit that had not yet been given, because he had not yet been glorified. And so Jesus is now making this fantastic revelation that he is the rock that will be struck so that the living water will flow. And once that living water begins to flow from his heart on Calvary, anybody of any nationality, anywhere, anytime, any generation, any age, anybody can come. He's not fussy. He wants us all. He wants his Father's house full. So if you go back to the book of Exodus, there was a very wonderful moment when Moses really needed to give the people water. They were stuck in this desert and they had nowhere to drink water. And the Lord told them to do what seems something totally unlikely. And that is, the Lord told him to go to a particular rock and that he was to strike the rock. But what the book of Exodus actually says is, "I will stand before you at that rock." So look at this. There's the rock. And Moses is to strike it. And the Lord said, "I will stand before you." So he's actually striking the Lord. That's exactly what happened on Calvary. That the people struck the Lord And out of him flowed the fountains of living water that are still flowing out to the generations everywhere all the time. His wonderful gift of grace. So Jesus was saying to them, I am the rock of salvation. Now, it's a huge topic and I won't go into it because otherwise I'll never finish the gospel. There's loads of texts in the Old Testament that God is the rock of our salvation. Okay, and Jesus says, I am that rock, and I'm the one that will be struck for you. But it is from this striking that you will receive life. We will continue this in our next session. Thank you for listening. Slán agus beannacht déilibh. Goodbye. God bless you.